The air in my father's study always smelled like expensive tobacco and the kind of old paper that carries the weight of a century. It was a room designed to make you feel small. It had worked on me when I was 6, and at 38, standing there in a black suit that still smelled like the damp earth of the cemetery, it was working again. My brother, Silas, wasn't standing. He was draped across our father's mahogany desk, swinging a heavy crystal paperweight back and forth. Clack. 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 The sound was rhythmic, annoying, and entirely intentional. Arthur, the family's attorney, sat across from him. Arthur looked like he had aged a decade in the 3 days since Dad's heart finally gave out. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at a manila folder as if it contained a death warrant. Julian, Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. I've served this family for 30 years. You know your father's temperament. He was a man of specific convictions. Get to the point, Arthur, I said. My voice was level. I've learned that when the world is tilting, the only way to stay upright is to keep your voice as flat as a horizon. The will was amended 6 weeks ago, Arthur said. During that week your father was in the hospital in Richmond. He added a codicil. It's absolute. Silas stopped swinging the paperweight. A slow, jagged grin spread across his face. It was the look of a man who had just realized the person he hated most was suddenly under his boot. The estate, Arthur continued, including the majority voting shares of Sterling Logistics, the real estate holdings in Arlington, and the family residence, it all goes to Silas. In its entirety. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't move. I didn't blink. The silence in the room became a physical thing, thick and suffocating. 15 years. I had given 15 years to Sterling. I was the one who negotiated the West Coast expansion. I was the one who navigated the 2018 crash while Silas was drying out in a luxury rehab facility in Arizona. I was the one who sat by Dad's bed in the ICU while Silas was MIA on a yacht in the Caribbean. And me? I asked. Arthur cleared his throat, a dry, rattling sound. You have been granted a one-time disbursement of $50,000. And this. He slid a small, wooden box across the desk. It was Dad's cigar humidor. Empty. Except for a single, handwritten note. Julian, you were always the strong one. The strong don't need help. They forge their own path. Silas needs the structure. Don't hold it against me. Dad. It was a betrayal wrapped in a compliment. A final, cold lesson from a man who viewed his sons as assets to be managed rather than children to be loved. Before I continue with what happened next, I said, looking at the camera as if the audience were right there in the lemon-scented shadows of my new life, take a second to like and subscribe. These stories reach far, and the truth usually travels the slowest. It's worth sticking around for. The eviction. The humiliation didn't end with the will. Silas wasn't content with winning, he needed to see me lose. 2 days later, I showed up at the Sterling Logistics headquarters. It's a glass and steel monolith overlooking the harbor. I had a 9 a.m. meeting with the regional directors to discuss the new shipping tariffs. When I swiped my keycard at the executive elevator, it turned red. I tried it again. Red. Morning, Julian, a voice said behind me. I turned. It was a man named Miller. He was the head of security, a former Marine who I had hired 5 years ago. He looked pained. Mr. Sterling, Silas, gave orders this morning. Your access has been revoked. All of it. My personal files are in that office, Miller. My father's journals. My own records. He said you could have 1 hour, Miller whispered, looking around to make sure no one was watching. He's got 2 guys from the warehouse coming up to escort you. I'm sorry, Julian. I really am. I spent that hour in a daze. I didn't take the awards or the photos of me with senators. I took the journals. I took the hard drive containing my personal contacts, the people I had spent a decade building trust with. As I walked out of the building with a single cardboard box, Silas was standing in the lobby. He was surrounded by a group of junior analysts, the kind of young, hungry climbers who can smell a change in power from a mile away. Check the box, boys, Silas said, laughing. Make sure he didn't take any of the company silver. Or maybe a few staplers. I know things are going to be tight for you now, Jules. I didn't answer. I walked through the glass doors and out into the humidity of a Virginia summer. I didn't have a car, the Mercedes was a company lease. I had to call a rideshare to take me to a place I had rented that morning. A one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the industrial district. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television, and the air smelled like a mix of diesel fumes and fried food. I sat on the floor of that empty apartment, the cardboard box in front of me, and I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat in total, absolute silence for 6 hours. I was mourning. Not for my father, he had died long before his heart stopped, but for the version of myself that believed hard work and loyalty were enough. That version was dead. And in the silence of that room, something else began to stir. The silent adjustment. For the first month, I disappeared. I changed my phone number. I stayed off social media. I lived on black coffee and the $50,000 that was meant to be my severance from my own life. Every morning, I walked to a small, greasy spoon diner called The Anchor. It sat directly across from the Sterling loading docks. From my booth in the back, I could see the trucks rolling in and out. I started a new notebook. June 12, 0800 hours. 3 Sterling rigs sitting idle at the gate. Turnaround time has increased by 14 minutes. Inefficiency begins at the top. June 15, 1400 hours. A major client, Blue Ridge Textiles, sent their regional VP to the office. He left within 20 minutes, looking furious. Silas must have tried to renegotiate the legacy rates. I wasn't just watching, I was diagnosing. Silas viewed the company as an ATM. He didn't understand that a logistics company is a delicate ecosystem. If you squeeze the drivers, they stop taking the overtime shifts. If you offend the port authorities, your containers sit at the bottom of the manifest. One afternoon, a man slid into the booth across from me. It was Miller, the security head. He wasn't in his uniform. He looked exhausted. He fired Sarah, Miller said, staring at his coffee. Sarah had been my father's assistant for 22 years. She knew the names of every client's children. She knew which port directors liked scotch and which ones preferred donations to their local charities. Why? I asked. She told him he couldn't use the company jet for a weekend in Vegas with his friends. Said it violated the insurance audit. He told her she was a relic and gave her 10 minutes to clear her desk. I felt a cold prickle of electricity run down my spine. Sarah was the gatekeeper. Where is she now? At home. Crying. She's 62, Julian. Who's going to hire her now? I am, I said. Miller looked at me like I was crazy. With what? You're living in a box on the east side. I have a plan, Miller. But I need to know one thing. Are you still loyal to the name on the building, or the man who built it? Miller didn't hesitate. I liked your dad. But I respected you. Silas. He treats us like we're part of the inventory. Good, I said, sliding a burner phone across the table. Stay in the building. Keep your ears open. I need to know every time a major contract comes up for renewal. And I need to know when Silas starts looking for a loan. A loan. The company is flush. It was flush, I corrected. But Silas just bought a $4 million condo in D.C. and a boat he can't pilot. The cash reserves won't last the quarter if he keeps bleeding the operating budget. The first move. I met Sarah at a park far from the downtown core. She looked fragile, her hands shaking as she held her purse. He called me a glorified secretary, Julian, she whispered. I know, Sarah. And he's going to regret every word of it. But I need your help. Do you remember the Evergreen file? Sarah's eyes sharpened. The fog of grief lifted, replaced by the professional clarity that had made her indispensable for 2 decades. The private holdings. The ones your father kept separate from the Sterling Corporation. Exactly. My father disinherited me from Sterling. But he was a man of patterns. He never liked putting all his eggs in one basket. There were 3 properties in the valley, old industrial sites that he bought in the 80s and never developed. They weren't listed in the will's primary schedule. Sarah nodded slowly. Because they weren't owned by Sterling Logistics. They were owned by a shell company called S.J. Holdings. He told me once that S.J. stood for Silas and Julian. He intended for those to be your safety net. Silas doesn't know they exist, I said. He only looked at the Sterling ledger. He thinks he got everything. But Julian, Sarah said, those sites are derelict. They're worth a few $100,000 at most. You can't build a kingdom on a few old warehouses. I'm not going to build on them, I said, a dark smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. I'm going to use them as a lever. The strategy was simple, but it required nerves of steel. The Port of Virginia was planning a massive expansion of their rail line. I knew this because I had been on the planning committee for 3 years before the disruption. The new rail line needed to pass through a specific corridor to avoid the wetlands. And that corridor ran directly through the heart of the S.J. Holdings properties. If Silas wanted to keep Sterling's dominance in the region, he would need access to that rail line. But the state wouldn't grant the permits unless the owners of the adjacent land, me, signed off on the easement. I wasn't just a disinherited son anymore. I was a roadblock. The rain in Virginia during October isn't like the quick, violent bursts of summer. It's a persistent, gray drizzle that soaks into the red clay and stays there, turning everything into a heavy, cold sludge. It matched my mood. I was living in a routine that would have driven the old Julian mad. Wake up at 4:30 a.m. Run 6 miles through the industrial park until my lungs burned and the rhythm of my sneakers on the asphalt was the only thing in my head. Shower in a bathroom that still smelled like the previous tenant's cheap cologne. Then, I would sit. I sat at a folding card table I'd bought at a thrift store. On it was my laptop, a stack of legal pads, and a map of the Richmond-Norfolk rail corridor. I was no longer a businessman. I was a cartographer of my brother's ruin. Silas was making it easy. Every week, Miller would send me a coded text or meet me at a different dive bar. The reports were always the same. Silas was cutting maintenance costs on the fleet to cover the interest on the personal loans he'd taken out against his shares. He had replaced the seasoned dispatchers with logistics consultants, college kids who understood algorithms but didn't know that a driver won't push through a mountain pass in a blizzard for a man who doesn't know their name. He's bleeding, Julian, Miller told me one night over a basket of greasy wings at a place called the Rusty Hook. The morale is in the gutter. 3 of our top drivers quit last week. They went to work for the competition. And the retail accounts? They're starting to look at other bidders. Patience, Miller, I said. A man like Silas doesn't just fall. He has to jump, thinking he's found a trampoline. I spent my days digging through the S.J. Holdings files Sarah had recovered. My father had been a hoarder of land, a man who believed that while empires crumble, the dirt remains. He had bought those valley properties through a series of offshore trusts that hadn't been touched in 30 years. The taxes were paid automatically from a small, stagnant account in the Cayman Islands. In the eyes of the law, S.J. Holdings was a ghost. And I was the only one who knew how to summon it. The Thorn encounter. To win, I needed more than just a roadblock. I needed a hammer. That hammer's name was Elias Thorn. If my father was the king of Virginia logistics, Elias Thorn was the emperor of the Atlantic seaboard. He was 70, with a face like a mountain and eyes that looked like they had seen everything and found most of it disappointing. He and my father had been rivals for 4 decades, a relationship built on mutual respect and a desire to see the other man go bankrupt. I didn't call his office. I knew he wouldn't take the call of a disinherited son. Instead, I waited for him at the one place I knew he went every Wednesday at 6 a.m., the municipal pier where he fished for striped bass. The wind was whipping off the water, sharp enough to cut. Elias was there, bundled in a heavy canvas coat, staring at a bobber. "Your father's dead, Julian," he said without looking at me. "I already sent the flowers. They were expensive. Don't ask for a loan." "I don't want a loan, Elias. I want to give you the one thing you've wanted since 1994. He finally looked at me, squinting against the salt spray. "And what's that?" "The Norfolk Bypass." Elias went still. The Norfolk Bypass was a mythical shipping route that would shave 4 hours off the trip from the port to the inland hubs. My father had blocked it for years because it would have required a rail easement through his territory. He'd held that land like a dog with a bone, just to spite Thorn. Your brother owns that land now, Elias said, turning back to the water. And Silas is an idiot, but even an idiot knows the value of a monopoly. Silas doesn't own it, I said. He owns Sterling Logistics. He owns the trucks and the warehouse leases. But he doesn't own the corridor. S.J. Holdings owns the corridor. I laid out the map on a nearby bait tackle box. I showed him the 3 derelict properties. I showed him the title trail that Silas had missed because he was too busy looking at the inheritance yacht catalog. I have the power to grant the easement, I said. But I won't grant it to Sterling. I'll grant it to a new entity. A joint venture. Gray Shore Solutions. Elias laughed, a dry, hacking sound. You want me to fund your revenge? You want me to put up the capital to build a rail line on land you technically own but haven't developed, just to spite your brother? No, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I want you to fund it because within 18 months, Sterling Logistics will be insolvent. When they go into receivership, they'll have to sell their contracts. And who do you think those clients will go to? A failing legacy brand, or the company that just cut their shipping costs by 20% and 4 hours of transit time? Elias reeled in his line. The hook was empty. He looked at the map, then at me. You're colder than your father was, Julian. He at least had a sense of sentimentality about the name. The name didn't keep me in the will, Elias. Results will. He stood up, packing his gear. Get the legal work done. If the title is clean, I'll provide the financing. But if you miss a single milestone, I take the land. All of it. Deal. The invisible noose. The next 6 months were a masterclass in staying small. I hired Sarah as my chief operating officer. We worked out of a shared workspace in a basement, the kind of place where startup kids drank kombucha and talked about disrupting the market. They had no idea that we were actually doing it, not with apps, but with easements and legal filings. I called it the shadow period. While Silas was being photographed at charity galas and buying a second vacation home in the Outer Banks, I was quietly filing the permits for the rail expansion. Because S.J. Holdings was a private entity, the filings didn't hit the public record in a way that would alert Silas. He wasn't looking at the Department of Transportation's minor infrastructure notices. He was looking at his Instagram engagement. But I needed a trigger. I needed Silas to make a move that would trap him. That trigger came in November. Miller called me at midnight. He's doing it, Julian. He's signing the master agreement with Omnicorp. Omnicorp was a global retail giant. A contract with them was the holy grail of logistics. It was also a death trap if you couldn't meet their volume. My father had turned them down 3 times because he knew our fleet couldn't handle the surge without massive capital investment. He thinks he's a genius, Miller whispered. He told the board this is the new era of Sterling. He's committed to a 99% on-time delivery rate for the entire East Coast. And the penalties? I asked. Draconian. If he falls below 95% for 2 consecutive months, Omnicorp has the right to seize the performance bond, which Silas just backed with the company's primary warehouse in Richmond. He was gambling the heart of the company on a hand he didn't know how to play. How is he going to meet the volume, Miller? He's planning on using the Valley route. He thinks he can just negotiate the rail access when the time comes. He's already told Omnicorp the bypass will be operational by Q3 next year. I leaned back in my chair, the plastic creaking in the silent basement. He's selling a bridge he hasn't even bought yet. Exactly. He's assuming the land belongs to Sterling. He never even checked the subtitles. Good, I said. Let him sign. Let him celebrate. The first crack. The celebration lasted exactly 3 months. By February, the Omnicorp volume began to hit. The Sterling fleet was aging, and the maintenance cuts Silas had made started to manifest in blown transmissions and sidelined rigs. The consultants were panicked. They were trying to reroute trucks through the mountains, but the winter was brutal. Delays mounted. I sat in the Anchor Diner, watching the Sterling trucks roll by. They looked dirty. The drivers looked haggard. I saw one driver, a guy named Pete who had been with us for 10 years, get out of his cab and kick the tire in frustration. I walked out to the lot. Rough day, Pete. He looked at me, surprised. Julian. Where the hell have you been? It's a madhouse in there. The new guy, your brother, he's got us running on paper-thin margins. No overtime, but double the loads. I'm about to hang it up. Don't hang it up yet, Pete, I said, handing him a card for Gray Shore Solutions. Keep your head down. In 6 weeks, give me a call. I'm going to need experienced lead drivers. You starting over? He asked, eyes narrowing. Not starting over, I said. Finishing what was started. The pressure on Silas was mounting. The Omnicorp penalties were starting to kick in. He was losing $200,000 a week in fines. The bank, seeing the performance bond at risk, began to tighten the screws on his personal loans. He was drowning, and he didn't even know the name of the water. Then, the letter arrived. I had Arthur, yes, the same Arthur who had read the will, deliver it. I had hired Arthur away from Silas months ago. It turns out, loyalty to a man like Silas is very expensive, and Arthur was a man who appreciated a steady paycheck and a clean conscience. The letter was a formal notice of trespass and cease and desist. It informed Sterling Logistics that their proposed rail expansion was encroaching on private property owned by S.J. Holdings. It stated that any further planning or construction on that corridor would be met with an immediate injunction. 20 minutes after the letter was delivered, my phone rang. For the first time in nearly a year, the caller ID read, Silas. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. I waited until the fourth call. I answered on the last ring. Julian, Silas hissed. His voice was trembling. I could hear the sound of a glass clinking in the background. What is this? What is S.J. Holdings? It's a property company, Silas. You should have read the excluded asset schedule in the back of the probate file. It was right behind the tax returns you didn't look at. You're blocking the Omnicorp deal, he screamed. I've got $40 million on the line. This is my company. My legacy. No, I said, my voice as cold as the rain outside. It's a business. And you're bad at it. If you want to talk, come to the diner. Tomorrow. 6 a.m. And Silas? Don't wear the Brioni suit. It doesn't fit the neighborhood. The diner was nearly empty at 6 a.m. The only sound was the hum of a refrigerator and the distant clatter of the cook scraping the griddle. I sat in the back booth, the one with the cracked vinyl and a view of the Sterling gates. I had a cup of black coffee and a manila folder. Nothing else. Silas arrived at 6:15. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. He wasn't wearing the Brioni suit, but he was wearing a cashmere overcoat that cost more than my first 3 cars. He looked out of place, like an orchid in a gravel pit. He slid into the booth across from me. He didn't order anything. He just stared at me, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. You think you're so smart, don't you? He spat. Playing these little games in the shadows. It's pathetic, Julian. It's small time. Small time is losing 5 points of market share in a single quarter, Silas, I said. Small time is putting a performance bond on the Richmond warehouse when you didn't have the infrastructure to support the volume. I'm just a property owner defending my borders. It's Dad's land, he yelled. A few truckers at the counter turned to look. He lowered his voice, leaning in. It was meant for the business. You're sabotaging the family legacy out of spite. Legacy? You sold Mom's art to pay for a boat, Silas. You fired Sarah. You treated the drivers like disposable parts. You didn't inherit a legacy, you inherited a machine you didn't bother to learn how to oil. Now the gears are grinding. I pushed the manila folder across the table. What's this? An exit strategy. He opened it. His eyes darted across the pages. I had spent the last 72 hours with Arthur and Elias Thorne's legal team drafting this. It wasn't a peace treaty. It was a surrender. You want 51% of the voting shares? Silas laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. You're insane. I'd rather let the bank take it. The bank won't just take the building, Silas. They'll come for you. You signed personal guarantees on those expansion loans. If Sterling goes under, they take the condo. They take the car. They take the yacht. You'll be left with exactly what you gave me, a box of memories and a heartfelt letter. He looked back at the papers. And if I sign? Gray Shore Solutions, my company, will grant Sterling the rail easement immediately. We'll also inject enough capital to cover the Omnicorp penalties and upgrade the fleet. You'll stay on as a consultant for 12 months to save face. You'll get a salary. You'll keep your house. But you'll have no vote. No keys. No power. I'll be a laughingstock, he whispered. You're already a laughingstock, Silas. People in this industry don't respect money, they respect movement. And you haven't moved a crate on time in 3 months. He looked out the window at the Sterling gates. A truck was trying to turn in, but the driver was struggling with a faulty air brake. The screech of metal on metal echoed across the street. It was the sound of an empire failing. I need time, he said. You have until the sun comes up tomorrow. At 9 a.m., Omnicorp is sending their legal team to Richmond to begin the termination of the contract. Once they pull out, the performance bond triggers. By noon, you'll be bankrupt. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill on the table for the coffee. Don't call me to negotiate, Silas. The offer only goes one way. The silent transition. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I didn't stay in the apartment. I drove out to the valley, to the derelict warehouses on the S.J. Holdings land. I stood in the middle of a rusted loading bay, the wind whistling through the gaps in the corrugated tin. This was the safety net my father had left me. He hadn't left me the company because he didn't trust me, he had left me the land because he knew I was the only one who would know what to do with it when Silas inevitably set the rest on fire. It was a cruel way to parent, but it was effective. At 8:45 a.m. the next morning, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Arthur. Attached was a scanned document. The signature was messy, the ink smeared in one corner. Silas had signed. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. I didn't pump my fist. I just felt a profound sense of relief, followed by a cold, sharp focus. The easy part was over. Now I had to save the company. Before I continue, take a second to like and subscribe. The climax of a story isn't the explosion, it's the reconstruction. Stick around to see how we rebuilt the ruins. The first day back. I walked into the Sterling headquarters at 10 a.m. The lobby was quiet, too quiet. The receptionist, a young woman who had replaced the one I'd hired years ago, looked up at me with confusion. Can I help you, sir? I'm Julian Sterling, I said. I believe my office is being prepared. I didn't wait for her to check a calendar. I headed straight for the executive elevator. When I swiped my new card, the one Arthur had issued an hour prior, the light turned green. When the doors opened on the top floor, I saw Silas. He was carrying a small box. He looked smaller than he had at the diner. The bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked like he'd been caught in a storm he didn't understand. We didn't say much. The passwords are on the desk, he said, his voice flat. I took my personal things. The yacht is being listed on Friday. It's for the best, Silas, I said. Is it? You got what you wanted. You're the king of the mountain again. Hope the air is as thin as you remember. He walked past me and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw him catch his reflection in the brass paneling. He looked away. I walked into my father's old office. Silas had changed the furniture, he'd replaced the mahogany with sleek, white Italian pieces that looked like they belonged in a dental clinic. I hated it. I picked up the phone. Sarah. I need you in here. And call Miller. Tell him we're doing a full audit of the maintenance logs. And Sarah, tell the drivers there's coffee and donuts in the break room at 5 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be there to talk to them personally. The reclamation. Rebuilding wasn't cinematic. It was a grind. It was 6 months of 16-hour days. It was flying to Chicago to beg Omnicorp for a 90-day probationary period. It was sitting in grease-stained garages with mechanics, explaining why we were going back to the old maintenance schedule. I sold the Italian furniture. I brought back the mahogany. Not because I missed my father, but because the mahogany was heavy. It was grounded. It reminded me that this business was built on things you could touch, not just numbers on a screen. The rail bypass was completed in record time. With Elias Thorne's capital and my land, we created a corridor that changed the logistics map of the entire state. Sterling's transit times dropped by 22%. By the end of the year, we weren't just profitable, we were dominant. I sat in my office on the anniversary of my father's death. The study was quiet. Outside, the harbor lights were twinkling, and I could hear the distant hum of the night shift loading containers. I opened the humidor, the one Dad had left me. It was still empty, except for that note. The strong don't need help. They forged their own path. I realized then that my father hadn't disinherited me to punish me. He had disinherited me because he knew that if he gave me the company, I would eventually lose it to someone like him. But if I had to take it back, I would own it in a way he never could. He had turned me into a shark to protect the reef. Aftermath and reflection. Silas lives in Florida now. He sends a Christmas card every year, usually with a picture of him on a golf course. He looks happy, in a vacuous, sun-drenched kind of way. He was never meant for the gray drizzle of Virginia logistics. He was meant for the sun. I'm still here. The company is bigger than ever. We've expanded into 3 new states. I have a board of directors now, and a fleet of 500 trucks. But I still go to the Anchor Diner every Wednesday morning. I still sit in that cracked vinyl booth and watch the trucks roll by. It keeps me hungry. It keeps me honest. The cost of victory? It was the relationship with the only brother I had. We don't speak on the phone. We don't share holidays. We are 2 strangers with the same last name, separated by a mountain of mahogany and 1,000 miles of road. Was it worth it? I look at the 500 families whose livelihoods are tied to this company. I look at the drivers who no longer have to worry about their brakes failing on a mountain pass. I look at the name on the building and I know it stands for something again. Was the outcome justified? What would you have done differently? Would you have let your brother drown to save the legacy, or would you have let the legacy burn to save your brother? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear about the time a rival tried to use my own tactics against me 3 years later, well, that's a story for another night. Subscribe, share, and remember, the path you forge is the only one you truly own.